Sarah Mitchell never imagined that her first day working at Forest Lawn Memorial Park would change her life forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as she adjusted her security badge and took a deep breath. Her supervisor, Marcus, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, had been walking her through the grounds when everything changed. They were conducting a routine inspection of the mausoleums when Marcus suddenly stopped. His face went pale, and his hand began to tremble. Sarah followed his gaze to the Holly Terrace, where the most famous residents rested in eternal peace. Something was wrong. The heavy bronze door to one of the private chambers stood slightly ajar, which should have been impossible. These doors required special keys, and only 3 people in the entire facility had access. Sarah's heart raced as Marcus pulled out his radio. His voice cracked as he called for backup. Within minutes, the area was swarming with security personnel and management. The director himself, Thomas Whitmore, arrived looking more shaken than Sarah had ever seen anyone. His expensive suit seemed to hang differently on his frame as tension filled the air. As they carefully opened the door wider, Sarah caught a glimpse inside. The chamber was immaculate, just as it should be, but something felt profoundly wrong. Thomas immediately ordered everyone back and made a phone call that Sarah couldn't quite hear. His hushed, urgent tone sent chills down her spine. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to make a man who had worked here for 30 years look genuinely terrified. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Police arrived, but not regular officers. These were detectives from a special unit, wearing suits that looked too expensive for government work. They questioned everyone who had been near the area in the past week. Sarah sat in the administrative office, watching through the window as more official-looking vehicles pulled up. News vans began gathering at the main gate, somehow already aware that something significant had happened. Marcus sat beside her, his coffee cup shaking in his hands. He had worked at Forest Lawn for 23 years and had never seen anything like this. He told Sarah about the security protocols, the constant surveillance, the dedication to protecting the privacy and dignity of those who rested here. Everything had been perfect until this morning. The breach wasn't just a security failure. It was something that shouldn't have been physically possible. As the day wore on, Sarah learned more from whispered conversations between staff members. The chamber in question belonged to Michael Jackson, the king of pop himself. Since his death in 2009, his final resting place had been one of the most secured locations in the entire facility. Armed guards, motion sensors, cameras recording every angle, and locks that required multiple authentication methods. Yet somehow, someone or something had gotten inside. Thomas Whitmore finally gathered the core staff in the conference room. His face was grave as he explained that what they had discovered inside would remain classified for now. However, he needed their complete cooperation with the investigation. Every employee would be questioned, their backgrounds checked again, their movements over the past month scrutinized. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had only just started working here, and now she was part of something much bigger than a simple security job. The meeting ended with a warning that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Thomas looked each person in the eye and said that whatever had happened was not a simple break-in. Evidence suggested that someone had been inside that chamber recently, but nothing appeared to be stolen. Instead, something had been left behind. Something that made absolutely no sense. Something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the events surrounding Michael Jackson's death and burial. Sarah left work that evening feeling like she had stepped into another reality. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the beauty of the moment was lost on her. She kept replaying Thomas's words in her mind. Something had been left behind. Not taken, but left. What could possibly be inside that chamber that would cause such a reaction from everyone involved? As she drove home, Sarah noticed a black sedan following her at a distance. It stayed 3 cars back, making the same turn she did. Paranoia crept into her thoughts. Was she being watched? Were all the employees being monitored? She took a sudden turn into a shopping center parking lot, and the sedan continued straight. Maybe she was imagining things, or maybe the stress of the day was getting to her. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The investigation was just beginning, and she was now part of something that involved one of the most famous people who had ever lived. The mystery of what lay inside Michael Jackson's final resting place consumed her thoughts. Who had breached the security? How had they done it? And most importantly, what had they left behind that was shocking enough to bring in federal investigators and terrify people who had worked in the death industry for decades? Morning came too quickly for Sarah. She had barely slept 3 hours before her alarm pulled her back to consciousness. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from unknown numbers and several text messages from colleagues. The media had exploded overnight with speculation about a disturbance at Forest Lawn, though official statements remained vague. Sarah dressed quickly, knowing that today would be even more intense than yesterday. When she arrived at work, the entire facility had transformed into something resembling a military operation. Temporary barriers had been erected around the Holly Terrace, and men in dark suits seemed to be stationed every 20 feet. Sarah showed her identification 3 times before even reaching the employee entrance. Marcus met her inside, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red and puffy, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled. He pulled her aside into an empty hallway. His voice was barely above a whisper as he explained what he had learned through back channels. The item left inside Michael Jackson's chamber was a sealed envelope, aged and yellowed as if it had been created years ago. But that wasn't the shocking part. The envelope bore a handwritten message on the outside that read, "To be opened in 2025 when the truth can finally emerge." The handwriting had been analyzed overnight, and preliminary results suggested it matched Michael Jackson's own writing style. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. How could Michael Jackson have left a message to be discovered years after his death? The logistics made no sense. Someone would have had to place it there after his burial, which meant breaching security at some point over the past 16 years. Or, the more disturbing possibility, someone had placed it there during the burial itself, which implied that people involved in laying him to rest knew about this planned revelation. Marcus continued explaining that the federal investigators had taken the envelope to a secure location for analysis. They needed to authenticate the age of the paper, the ink, and the handwriting before anyone could even consider opening it. The Jackson family had been notified and were reportedly flying in from various locations. Legal teams were being assembled because whatever was inside that envelope could have massive implications. Was it a will? A confession? Evidence of something criminal? Nobody knew, and the speculation was driving everyone crazy. Throughout the morning, Sarah and other security personnel were interviewed again, this time by FBI agents who seemed particularly interested in any unusual activity over the past year. They showed her photographs of various people, asking if she recognized any of them from around the facility. Most were strangers, but 2 faces seemed vaguely familiar. She couldn't place them exactly, but something about their features triggered a distant memory. The agents noted her hesitation and flagged those particular photos for follow-up. By afternoon, news helicopters circled overhead despite the no-fly zone that had supposedly been established. The main gate was completely blocked by news vans, reporters, and curious onlookers. Forest Lawn had become the center of a media frenzy that rivaled the coverage of Michael Jackson's actual death. Social media exploded with theories ranging from plausible to the completely absurd. Some claimed it was a publicity stunt. Others believed it was evidence that Michael Jackson had faked his own death. The most extreme theories involved government conspiracies and cover-ups that stretched back decades. Sarah was assigned to monitor the internal security feeds while the investigation continued. She sat in the surveillance room, watching dozens of screens showing every angle of the property. The footage from the past week was being reviewed frame by frame. So far, nothing unusual had appeared. The cameras showed normal operations, regular visitors, and routine maintenance. Yet somehow, someone had accessed that chamber without being detected. Then something caught her eye. On one of the older recordings from 3 weeks ago, there was a brief flicker in the camera covering the Holly Terrace entrance. Just a fraction of a second where the image went dark and then returned to normal. She called over one of the technical specialists who examined the footage more closely. His expression changed from curiosity to concern. The flicker wasn't a technical glitch. It was a sophisticated loop. Someone had hacked into their security system and inserted recorded footage to cover their tracks. This discovery changed everything. What they were dealing with wasn't some amateur breaking and entering. This was a professional operation executed by someone with serious technical skills and detailed knowledge of Forest Lawn security infrastructure. The FBI agents were immediately notified, and within an hour, a team of cyber forensic experts arrived to examine the entire digital security network. As evening approached, Sarah was finally allowed to take a break. She walked to the employee cafeteria, which was nearly empty except for a few exhausted staff members. She grabbed a coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the peaceful grounds that now felt anything but peaceful. Marcus joined her, setting down his own cup with a heavy sigh. He told her something that made her blood run cold. The cyber team had found evidence of multiple breaches over the past 5 years. Small, almost undetectable intrusions that lasted only seconds. Someone had been systematically studying their security, testing it, preparing for the moment when they would leave that envelope. This wasn't a sudden decision or a crime of opportunity. This was a plan that had been years in the making. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who would go to such lengths? What could possibly be in that envelope that justified this level of planning and risk? And why now, in 2025, specifically? The message on the envelope suggested this timing was intentional, that whatever truth it contained needed to wait until this exact year to be revealed. The Jackson family arrived that evening under heavy security. Sarah watched from a distance as they were escorted through a private entrance. She could see the tension in their postures, the worry etched on their faces. Whatever was happening affected them deeply, and their arrival signaled that this mystery was about to enter a new phase. The envelope would be opened soon, and when it was, Sarah had a feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning brought an unexpected development that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Sarah arrived at Forest Lawn to find the atmosphere had shifted from tense to absolutely electric. Thomas Whitmore stood at the entrance to the administrative building with an expression that mixed disbelief, fear, and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was wonder, or maybe dread. Whatever he had learned overnight had fundamentally changed his perspective on everything. A mandatory meeting was called for all security and senior staff. Sarah filed into the conference room along with 30 other employees, all looking exhausted and anxious. Federal agents lined the walls, their faces unreadable. When everyone was seated, Thomas stood at the front of the room and took a long, steadying breath before speaking. What he said next would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. The envelope had been opened under controlled conditions with representatives from the Jackson family, FBI, and legal teams present. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten letter spanning 12 pages, a USB drive containing encrypted files, and a small key with a number engraved on it. The letter, authenticated as genuinely written by Michael Jackson and dated just days before his death, contained revelations that were both deeply personal and profoundly significant. Thomas couldn't share all the details, but he revealed enough to make everyone understand the gravity of the situation. Michael Jackson had apparently known his death was imminent. The letter suggested he had been receiving threats and believed that certain powerful individuals wanted him silenced. He wrote about secrets he had discovered during his lifetime, information about influential people in entertainment, business, and politics who had engaged in activities that would destroy their careers and possibly land them in prison. But the most shocking part wasn't about external threats. Michael Jackson had written extensively about his own fears, his struggles, and his determination to leave behind evidence that would protect his children and reveal truths he couldn't speak while alive. He expressed concerns that his death might be portrayed a certain way, that the narrative would be controlled by others, and that the real story would be buried along with him. The envelope was his insurance policy, his voice from beyond the grave. Sarah felt her hands trembling as Thomas continued. The USB drive contained documents, recordings, and video files that were currently being analyzed by federal investigators. Preliminary reviews suggested the materials included financial records showing fraudulent transactions, recorded conversations with unnamed individuals discussing illegal activities, and documentation of contracts that had been signed under duress. The implications were staggering. If authentic, these files could potentially implicate dozens of high-profile individuals in various crimes. The small key remained the biggest mystery. The number engraved on it matched no known safe deposit box, locker, or storage facility in any database the investigators had searched. Michael Jackson's letter mentioned the key but provided only a cryptic clue. Where the music lives, the final truth waits in silence. Nobody could agree on what this meant. Was it referring to a recording studio, a concert hall, one of his properties? The possibilities seemed endless. Over the following days, the investigation expanded dramatically. Financial experts began tracing the transactions documented in the files. Some dated back to the 1980s, suggesting Michael Jackson had been gathering this information for most of his adult life. The recordings were being transcribed and analyzed for voice identification. Early results confirmed that several voices matched known public figures, though their identities were being kept confidential for now. Sarah's role evolved from basic security to being part of a larger team protecting the integrity of the evidence and the investigation. She was given additional clearance and began working closely with federal agents to ensure no further breaches occurred. The pressure was immense. Media scrutiny intensified daily. Conspiracy theories multiplied by the hour. Everyone wanted to know what was inside that envelope, and the official silence only fueled more speculation. One afternoon, Sarah was reviewing security protocols when one of the FBI agents, a woman named Agent Morrison, approached her. Morrison had kind but sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. She asked Sarah to walk with her through the grounds, away from listening devices and prying ears. What Morrison shared during that walk changed Sarah's understanding of everything. Morrison explained that the Bureau had been aware of some of Michael Jackson's concerns before his death. He had apparently tried to report certain information, but had been dismissed as paranoid or seeking attention. After his death, those reports were filed away and forgotten. Now, with this new evidence, the Bureau was reopening several cold cases and launching new investigations. The implications extended far beyond the entertainment industry into corporate fraud, political corruption, and potentially international criminal networks. But there was a problem. Some of the individuals potentially implicated in these files were extremely powerful, with connections to law enforcement, media, and government. There was genuine concern about evidence disappearing, witnesses being intimidated, or the entire investigation being shut down before the truth could emerge. Morrison admitted they didn't know who they could trust completely, which was why the investigation was being handled by a specialized unit with minimal internal communication. Sarah asked the obvious question, why was Michael Jackson targeted? What had he discovered that made him such a threat? Morrison's answer was chilling. Michael Jackson had access to powerful people in private spaces that others couldn't reach. His celebrity status meant he attended exclusive events, visited private estates, and interacted with individuals who believed they could speak freely around entertainers, not realizing that Jackson was far more observant and intelligent than they assumed. He had seen things, heard conversations, and witnessed behaviors that exposed the darker side of power and privilege. Moreover, Michael Jackson had begun speaking out about corruption in the music industry, about exploitation of artists, and about the manipulation of public perception by powerful interests. He was becoming increasingly vocal about these issues in the months before his death. Some believed he was planning to expose specific individuals and companies, which made him dangerous to those who had the most to lose. The letter inside the envelope confirmed these suspicions. Michael Jackson wrote that he knew the risks he was taking but felt morally obligated to leave behind evidence that could help others and potentially prevent future abuses. He expressed hope that by 2025, enough time would have passed for the information to be revealed without putting his children in immediate danger. He also believed that by this year, technology and social awareness would have advanced enough for people to take his evidence seriously rather than dismissing it as a paranoid delusions of a troubled celebrity. As Sarah returned to her duties that evening, she realized she was part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about Michael Jackson anymore. It was about systemic corruption, abuse of power, and the lengths people would go to protect their secrets. The mystery discovered inside his final resting place had opened a door to truths that many people desperately wanted to keep closed. And Sarah, just security guard who happened to be working her first day when everything unraveled, was now on the front lines of an investigation that could reshape multiple industries and bring down some of the most influential people in the world. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning exactly 2 weeks after the initial discovery. Sarah was reviewing overnight security footage when Agent Morrison burst into the surveillance room, her usual composure replaced by barely contained excitement. The cyber forensics team had successfully decrypted the most protected files on the USB drive, and what they found was beyond anything anyone had anticipated. Within the hour, Sarah found herself in a secure briefing room with a dozen federal agents and legal experts, watching as the true scope of the conspiracy began to reveal itself. The encrypted files contained a detailed chronology that Michael Jackson had been compiling since the early 1990s. He had essentially been conducting his own investigation into what he called the network, a loosely connected group of extremely wealthy and influential individuals who use their power to exploit others while maintaining a pristine public image. The documentation was meticulous and devastating. Financial transfers that funded illegal activities, contracts designed to trap artists in predatory agreements, and recorded conversations where powerful people discussed manipulating public perception and silencing critics. One particularly damning section detailed how certain media narratives about Michael Jackson himself had been deliberately manufactured to discredit him. The files contained emails and internal memos from tabloid publications showing that stories were being planted by public relations firms working for individuals who wanted to destroy his credibility. The allegations that had plagued the final decades of his life, while he maintained his innocence, appeared to have been part of a coordinated effort to neutralize him as a threat. The evidence didn't prove his innocence conclusively, but it demonstrated that powerful forces had been actively working to shape public opinion against him. Sarah felt sick as she absorbed the information. The manipulation wasn't limited to Michael Jackson. The files documented similar campaigns against other celebrities, journalists, and activists who had threatened to expose corruption. Some of these individuals had died under suspicious circumstances. Others had been driven to bankruptcy, addiction, or obscurity through systematic harassment and sabotage. The network, as Michael Jackson had called it, operated through legitimate businesses and charitable organizations, making their activities nearly impossible to detect or prosecute. Agent Morrison explained that the Bureau was now coordinating with multiple agencies and international law enforcement bodies. The conspiracy crossed borders and involved individuals in several countries. Some names in the files were immediately recognizable: entertainment moguls, corporate executives, politicians, and even some law enforcement officials. Others were unfamiliar but appeared to hold significant power behind the scenes. The web of connections was staggering in its complexity and reach. The focus shifted to finding what the mysterious key unlocked. Michael Jackson's clue, where the music lives, the final truth waits in silence, had sparked hundreds of theories. Teams were dispatched to his former properties, including Neverland Ranch, his various recording studios, and locations significant to his career. Nothing matched the key. Sarah suggested they think more abstractly. Perhaps where the music lives wasn't a physical location, but a conceptual one. This line of thinking led to a revelation. One of the legal experts remembered that Michael Jackson had established several trusts and foundations, some of which had been largely forgotten after his death. A thorough search of his legal record revealed a small, obscure trust created in 2008 called the Musical Legacy Preservation Trust. It had minimal activity and seemed to exist primarily to maintain a small storage facility in downtown Los Angeles. The number on the key matched the facility's unit number. Within hours, a team was assembled to access the storage unit. Sarah was included because of her security clearance and her role in the initial discovery. The drive to downtown Los Angeles felt surreal. They traveled in an unmarked convoy, taking indirect routes to avoid potential surveillance. Agent Morrison briefed everyone on the operation's sensitivity. If word got out about this location before they secured its contents, there was a significant risk of interference or destruction of evidence. The storage facility was unremarkable, one of thousands scattered throughout the city. The owner had no idea of the unit's significance and was shocked when federal agents appeared with warrants. The unit itself was climate-controlled and appeared to be maintained regularly. The record showed no one had physically entered it in over 15 years. The monthly fees were paid automatically from the trust. When they unlocked the door, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The unit was lined with filing cabinets, shelves of labeled boxes, and a sophisticated computer system that looked remarkably advanced for 2009. Clearly, Michael Jackson had spared no expense in preserving whatever was stored here. The room was organized with almost obsessive precision, every item catalogued and protected. The team spent the next 12 hours carefully documenting and securing the contents. The filing cabinets contained physical copies of documents spanning decades, contracts, letters, financial statements, and personal notes. The computer system, once powered on by technical specialists, revealed a massive database of organized evidence. Michael Jackson had created his own digital archive, index and cross-reference, containing scanned documents, audio files, video recordings, and detailed written accounts of events he had witnessed or learned about. One section of the database was labeled "For My Children," containing personal messages and explanation for why he had compiled this information. He wrote about wanting them to understand the truth about his life, the challenges he had faced, and the reasons behind his choices. He expressed love and hope that they would live in a world where truth and justice prevailed. Reading his words, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. This wasn't the work of a paranoid or troubled man. This was a careful, deliberate effort of someone who knew the truth needed to survive even if he didn't. Another section was labeled "The Network Exposed," and it contained the most comprehensive documentation of corruption Sarah had ever seen. Michael Jackson had essentially built a criminal case file against dozens of individuals and organizations. He had dates, locations, amounts, names, and detailed descriptions of illegal activities. Some entries dated back to his childhood, suggesting that even as a young performer, he had been observing the darker aspects of the industry. The recordings were particularly powerful. Hours of secretly recorded conversations in which people discussed illegal activities, believing they were in private spaces where they could speak freely. Michael Jackson's celebrity status had given him access to exclusive parties, private meetings, and informal gatherings where the wealthy and powerful let their guards down. He had apparently been recording these interactions for years, building an archive that could verify everything else in his documentation. As the sun set on that long day, the team began the process of transporting everything to a secure federal facility. Sarah stood outside the storage unit, watching as box after box was loaded into armored vehicles. Agent Morrison approached her, looking exhausted but determined. She told Sarah that what they had found would take months, possibly years, to fully analyze and act upon. But preliminary assessments suggested they had enough evidence to launch investigations that could result in hundreds of indictments. The conspiracy was real, and it was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Michael Jackson had dedicated years of his life to documenting it, knowing he might not live to see justice served, but hoping that eventually someone would find his evidence and use it to expose the truth. His final resting place had held the key, literally and figuratively, to unveiling corruption that had operated in shadow for decades. Now that key had been found, and the truth was beginning to emerge from silence into light. 3 months after the storage unit discovery, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse watching history unfold. The first indictments had been unsealed, and the media frenzy had reached unprecedented levels. What had begun as a mysterious discovery at Forest Lawn had evolved into the largest investigation of corruption in entertainment and business history. The evidence Michael Jackson had preserved was proving devastating to those he had documented, and the ripple effects were being felt across multiple industries. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and families of victims who had suffered at the hands of the network. Sarah had been called to testify about the discovery and the subsequent investigation. She had spent weeks preparing with prosecutors, reviewing her actions and ensuring her testimony would be clear and unshakable. As she sat waiting to be called, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first morning at Forest Lawn. The lead prosecutor, a formidable woman named Catherine Chen, had built her case meticulously using Michael Jackson's evidence as a foundation. The files had provided roadmaps for investigators to follow, leading them to additional witnesses, documents, and proof that corroborated everything Michael Jackson had documented. Chen had explained to Sarah that without his archive, most of these crimes would have remained hidden forever. The statute of limitations had expired on some offenses, but many could still be prosecuted, and civil suits were being filed in cases where criminal prosecution wasn't possible. Agent Morrison testified before Sarah, explaining how the investigation had unfolded and the measures taken to ensure evidence integrity. She described the sophisticated nature of Michael Jackson's documentation system and how it had clearly been designed by someone who understood both the importance of proper evidence handling and the need to protect that evidence for years or even decades. The defense attorneys tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that it had been collected improperly or could have been fabricated, but forensic experts had verified the authenticity of documents, recordings, and digital files beyond reasonable doubt. When Sarah was finally called to testify, she felt her heart pounding as she approached the witness stand. Chen's questions were straightforward, establishing the timeline of the discovery and Sarah's role in protecting the integrity of the investigation. Sarah described finding the open chamber door, the discovery of the envelope, and the subsequent revelation of the storage unit. She spoke about the professionalism and dedication of everyone involved in ensuring the evidence was preserved and properly analyzed. During cross-examination, defense attorneys tried to suggest that Sarah and others at Forest Lawn might have tampered with evidence or participated in planting it. Sarah calmly refuted each suggestion, referring to security footage, multiple witnesses, and the constant presence of federal agents during critical moments. The defense's strategy seemed desperate, and Sarah could see jury members looking skeptical of their implications. As the trial progressed over the following weeks, more details emerged publicly. News organizations obtained and published some of the less sensitive documents, revealing the scope of the conspiracy. Major corporations were exposed for fraudulent practices. Entertainment executives were shown to have systematically exploited artists while enriching themselves illegally. Political donations that had influenced legislation were revealed to have come from laundered money. The revelations came daily, each one adding another layer to the story. The Jackson family made a public statement, expressing both grief and vindication. They spoke about Michael's struggles during his lifetime, the accusations he had faced, and the toll that constant scrutiny had taken on him and their entire family. They acknowledged that he hadn't been perfect, but argued that the coordinated effort to destroy his reputation had been motivated by fear of what he knew and might reveal. The evidence he had left behind was proving his claims about being targeted and discredited. Public opinion began shifting dramatically. People who had believed the worst about Michael Jackson started reconsidering their views in light of the evidence showing how narratives had been manufactured against him. Others argued that his personal failings were separate from the conspiracy and that both things could be true simultaneously. The debate raged across media platforms, but increasingly there was acknowledgement that a great injustice had been done, both to him and to the many other victims of the network he had exposed. Sarah found herself becoming a minor public figure, giving interviews about the discovery and its aftermath. She spoke carefully, always emphasizing the team effort involved and the importance of the evidence over personalities. She wanted people to focus on the systematic corruption that had been exposed rather than getting lost in celebrity gossip or conspiracy theories. The story was important because it revealed how power could be abused and how ordinary people could be harmed by those who operated without accountability. As months turned into a year, the legal proceedings continued. Some defendants pleaded guilty and cooperated with investigators, leading to additional revelations and more indictments. Others fought the charges vigorously, leading to lengthy trials. Civil suits resulted in massive settlements for victims who had been exploited or harmed. Reforms were implemented in the entertainment industry, with new regulations designed to prevent the abuses that had been exposed. Sarah eventually left her position at Forest Lawn, accepting a job with a federal agency focused on investigating corruption. Her experience had given her unique insights and skills that were valuable in this new role. She stayed in touch with Agent Morrison, who had become a friend and mentor. They occasionally discussed the case that had brought them together and marveled at the unlikely series of events that had led to such massive change. The mysterious key that Michael Jackson had left behind had indeed unlocked something profound, a truth that powerful people had worked desperately to keep hidden, a systematic pattern of abuse and corruption that had operated freely for decades, and a legacy that was far more complex than anyone had understood during his lifetime. His final resting place had become a starting point for justice rather than just an ending point for his life. On the anniversary of the discovery, Sarah returned to Forest Lawn. She stood outside the Holly Terrace, now restored to its quiet dignity after the chaos of the investigation. She thought about Michael Jackson and the extraordinary effort he had made to document the truth. She wondered if he had truly understood the impact his evidence would have, or if he had simply hoped it might make some small difference. A family visiting a nearby grave approached, and Sarah stepped aside to give them privacy. As she walked back toward the entrance, she noticed the sun breaking through clouds, casting dramatic light across the grounds. It seemed symbolic somehow, light piercing through darkness, truth emerging from concealment. The mystery that had been discovered inside Michael Jackson's final resting place had indeed been shocking, but perhaps more importantly, it had been transformative. It had exposed corruption, brought justice to victims, and demonstrated that even from beyond the grave, one person's dedication to truth could change a world. Sarah left Forest Lawn that day knowing that the story wasn't really over. Investigations continued, legal proceedings moved forward, and reforms were being implemented. But the most important part had been accomplished. The truth had emerged from silence, carried forward by evidence that had waited patiently for the right moment. Michael Jackson's final gift to the world wasn't music or performance. It was truth preserved with care and purpose, waiting to be discovered when the time was right. That discovery had come on an ordinary morning when a security guard noticed an open door, and nothing had been the same since.